All right. Welcome to Delivered with Dylan and Dale. Today, the focus of the episode is on hourly versus fixed pricing. And so, what Dale and I are going to try and discuss is what are the big differences between the two, between an hourly and a fixed pricing model, and how do these differences maybe impact your service business and your clients, and then things to consider when you're trying to choose between the two. Again, we're not we're just basically going to provide some of what we've found to be in our experience to be some of the pros and cons of each model. And then, how you decide to apply those or use those probably depends largely on what your goals are and what your business looks like. So, just to lay some context out, Dale, when we're talking about fixed pricing versus hourly, fixed pricing says we tell a client that we're going to deliver X for whatever amount of dollars. When we do hourly, what we're telling the client is, we're going to spend X number of hours and, with the goal of achieving, this objective that you've set in place. So for example, for a website, I and my business have done both of these models over the course of my career. We used to price a website. We'd say this is going to take 50 hours, and that's our estimate for hours. And so that would obviously be the hourly approach. And we've since transitioned to a fixed pricing model where it's like, this is how much it's going to cost. We're not talking about the hours it's going to take to produce. So Dale, I want to go to you first, and I want to get your take on the hourly component.
Yeah. So I'll give a spoiler alert and say, I love fixed pricing. Getting to it is harder in our business than I would like it to be. And, maybe some of that's self-imposing, right? Maybe that's my brain telling me, for the reasons we're going to discuss, it's more work, danger, right? So we have to remember to trust our instincts too. But
Right.
An hourly project, their website is a great example of a fixed. An hourly for us and like our service business is quite common when we're hired to be like an extension to their team, right? We've got there's a gap as well as some overlap between our team and the clients. And
Right.
It's not always as cut and dry. The deliverable, it might be you're performing this service, which could be marketing, right? And you have some scope, but there might be some times, hey, when someone's out, you got to jump in and do this, or we might throw an extra thing at you. And even in saying that, you can I call it productizing. Like I like the ability to put something into a product, which would be fixed.
Right.
There's an opportunity to do that, but it's a lot more difficult, right? Because you're dealing in hourly pricing, you're dealing a lot more with unknowns, right? We're working right now, we're helping a company document all of their processes, and I don't know anything about their company. I'm really good at documenting processes, coming up with strategies. I don't have a fixed price for that. I don't know. I haven't done it a ton of times. I've done it in all my businesses, but I haven't offered it. So in this scenario, I felt it was better to do it as an hourly thing. We meet a certain amount of times a week, and then as time goes on, I give them deliverables, right? A lot of unknowns. Right. Hourly projects are they can be stressful. They're stressful to your team. There's no repeatable process. You're just kind of like, you're out there gun for hire, mercenary, like just storming constantly. Not the best place for everyone to be if that's not your thing, right? You may want to think about, we talked about this in our last episode, letting people fail, rescuing. A lot of it had to do with putting people out into what we call the mist. If you're not comfortable with that, you probably don't want to take those kind of projects on. You want to stay with the fixed, right? So I know that was a long explanation.
Right.
This is a complex thing.
Well, yeah.
Why you would want to do hourly, like a good reason to do it.
Right. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is hourly maybe has a place in pathfinding, when you are exploring a new avenue or a new service or a new client. And obviously the beautiful thing about hourly, the double-edged sword of hourly maybe is that you're kind of protected against scope creep. You can ensure that you're not going to do work for free because you're starting the meter when you're doing that work. And when you're taking on new things, that can be a level of security that's hard to find. So I think it maybe has a place when you're pathfinding. And then, like you said, from my perspective, the goal of that pathfinding experience, is to maybe identify if this is a useful product offering, of what you're doing is a useful thing, and if you can repeat it, and if you can productize it, then you can maybe shift it to a fixed price model. But there's still, if you think about, like, for example, I have some family that works in like big law, and they still do hourly. Like big law firms still do retainer hourly stuff.
Sure.
And so I guess there is a purpose for that. There is a place for that. But I know the people who work for those big law firms, and I know what they track in like 6-minute intervals, and I know what that kind of thing can do to you as a human being, right? Like, Dale, do you want to be tracking your time in 6-minute buckets? Like, is that what you think is a useful, or your team, right? Like, do you think it's in your team's interest to be, tracking each minute and second that they're working on client work, for example?
Right. The other thing about hourly projects is I could distinguish from fixed is the milestones aren't as clear, or they're drawn out, or the client can often be an obstacle to reaching the milestone. Like, you can do 4 months of work and the client needs to provide a piece of information that's preventing you from that milestone. And typically in fixed price situations, you're getting paid on milestones, a deliverable, right?
Right.
That's not always the case for every service. Sometimes you're working collaboratively, and you can't have 20 fixed projects that you're not getting paid on. That's going to put you out of business. So hourly in some situations may also make sense for cash flow reasons. And I could see the attorney thing, like they could do all this work and you get a court date 9 months away and there's no outcome.
Right.
Charge for the outcome. You just can't run a business.
Right.
It's not going to work.
Right. I think, I think if we're talking about pros of hourly, we're saying that it's easy to start. Like, you hail a cab, you get in the cab, the meter starts running. There's no discovery component. If you're going to attach a fixed cost to work from a client, you need to understand what that work is going to be, right? Like, you need to dive in and understand what is the full scope here before I attach a guarantee or some certainty to a price. I need to understand the work first. Hourly, you don't necessarily need to do that, which I think is one of the appeals to it, is like you can just kind of dive in, get started. And then as you're, like I said, pathfinding, like as you're like kind of macheting your way through this jungle, you can ensure that you're being compensated for that work. So that's why I think, like I said, it's useful for that kind of that pathfinding work. But I think the cons are also pretty apparent. One being obviously the faster you work, the less money you make if you're using an hourly model, which is pretty counterintuitive to anybody who's cares about efficiency or innovation. Either of those things are punished under the hourly model. So I think that's an issue.
You could charge more for being fast.
You could charge more. So you're saying, okay, if you want to make more money doing hourly, let's increase. No. So you're saying let's increase our hourly rate, essentially, right? If you think, if you're able to do things faster, is that kind of how you would continue to scale an hourly model?
Yeah, you use the attorney as an example. I have an attorney. He's a pit bull, man. Like, I've seen him slams the phone down if people are yelling at him or whatever. He's like $600 an hour, but I know like he's gonna win, right?
Right.
But he is not your usual fee, but I know when you call him in, I wouldn't want to be going against this guy. I would just throw my hands up and say you win. Right. So. Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess you're right. You could continue to push your hourly rate up, but at some point, you're going to be, you're going to be compared to other providers in your space based on their hourly rate. Like, someone's going to be like, okay, sure, I've got 3 options. Your hourly rate is ABC.
if your hourly rate, there is going to be, the market is going to limit what you can make your hourly rate be. At some point, people are going to tell you no because your hourly rate is too high. And they're going to compare, that's a metric they can use to compare you to others. Whereas like a fixed price is more difficult to compare because what's being delivered might be different, but like hourly, it's like apples to apples. And so, and then people can then find the cheapest apple when they've kind of stacked you up against, perhaps your competitors. So that's the other reason I think hourly is limiting. And I think it makes all sorts of time tracking and billing hassles for people. We used to do the hourly model. We would send clients a time entry report. It shows all the work we've done, in 10-minute increments. So not 6 minutes, but not necessarily really, much different than that. And it just leaves you open to clients like cross-referencing entries and like double asking about your work. And then even if they're wrong, they're wrong about this request, they might start to subtly not trust you because they're reviewing all this stuff and they're right. Human beings and they're asking questions, and they all of a sudden they might have like this, prejudice against you or this distrust against you. And even if you're acting ethically and doing your best. And so I think you leave yourself open to those disputes and a lot of admin work when you're doing the hourly model. I don't know if that's something you've encountered.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, in marketing, we learn and we teach. Our brains are wired for survival, cave people, and we're wired to look for We're wired to look for inconsistencies. That's why
true.
Branding's so important, like having the same fonts. You got one spot on the page where the graphic looks totally different or the font's different or the color's different. Your brain says, it's easier to say what's wrong about this than what's right, especially with billing and especially when it comes to people's wallets, right?
Right.
Money is a very sensitive matter.
Right. Yes. And I think when people
you're billing right, what's your work ethic or what's the work deliverable, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're charging somebody for something, and then you're also presenting them with like a detailed breakdown of where that money went, obviously they're going to be scrupulous. And like you said, they're going to pick that apart because you've given them a tool to kind of dissect the value in which you've charged them. And that might seem like, good, honest transparency, but the challenge is like no two tasks are ever the same. Even the client might not understand that. So like it took us an hour last week to do this to that, but everything is different. The week is different, not the same man, not the same river. This week, maybe it's an hour and 15 minutes. And it's just like, that's a stupid thing to get caught up in my opinion. Like if we're trying to achieve an outcome for you, like grow your business or launch this or do that or develop this, it's like, I personally don't want to get caught up in conversations around 15 extra minutes here or 15 extra minutes there. That's me personally. I just think it's soul sucking and maybe a poor use of my time as an expert and my knowledge. So that's another one of my gripes with the hourly thing. I think, like you said, you could always scale up your pricing, your hourly rate, but I think you'll hit a limit. I think you're going to hit a ceiling when people start comparing that hourly rate to competitors in the same marketplace. And fixed costs for things are harder to compare because the deliverables might be different. The scope of work might be different. Let's talk about fixed, Dale. So fixed, instead of saying, look, we're not really sure what this is, so we're just going to throw 50 hours at it and see what happens. We're saying, you're trying to do this or you need this. This is how much it's going to cost. And then our job is to do whatever we can to deliver that outcome or to produce that deliverable. And we're rewarded for efficiency, right? Because if we can deliver that thing in a shorter period of time to the same degree and to the same quality, then all of a sudden we've profited more off of that, which is how you create scale is obviously, through leverage, and leverage is being able to do more with less. And I think that, that's one of the huge pros of fixed costs is you attach that to, an outcome instead of an input, which is your hours. And so, I also think it creates a greater commitment from the client. Like if you tell a client hourly, and I've seen this has happened to me before, they can just kind of turn the faucet on and turn the faucet off of work whenever they feel like it. Like they can reach out and then you turn the faucet back on. Then they're like, well, I disappear and I turn the faucet back off. And that just leads to a lot of fragmentation of your work. And I think it leads to poor outcomes. And I think we need committed clients to do the work we do. I think it makes our lives much easier when our clients are fully invested in the projects or the outcomes. And so when you ask for them to pay maybe 100% upfront or at least 50% upfront, and you're not letting them kind of just, jump in and jump out with this hourly model, I think you have more committed clients, which leads to better work. I don't know. Does that check out?
That's a
challenge me, Dale.
No, I'm really torn about this. I think anytime, we talked about this. I don't think there's a clear answer here for everybody. I think this is a journey.
Okay, that's right.
This is a journey that every business needs to consider, and you might need to try, if hourly is not working for you, try fixed. Try and fix as much as you can. Take any business, right? What kind of a business doesn't want a fixed sell and a fixed cost, right? That's how you determine your profit margin. At the beginning of the year, we're supposed to, as business owners, set budgets for the year. We're guessing on things. Right. We're committing to a sales volume. We're committing to payroll. We're committing to all these things. That really lends itself to the fixed product, the fixed pricing model, right?
Right.
So, but I got to be honest with you, I'm still a little hesitant about it. I have found it difficult to fully transition over to that. I'm still probably 50-50.
It's a process. It's certainly a process. I'm not even 100% over to the fixed.
I do have one note here I did want to talk about. So this is a scenario, right?
Sure. Okay.
So a fixed cost for something that's recurring, and they may not necessarily use it. So if you say, I'm going to deliver X every month, every quarter, every year, whatever, and it requires input, is it a use it or lose it situation? Like they're still paying and they're losing out on it? How did you have a way to handle this? And seasonal businesses are a great example of this, right? So how do you handle that? That's what I want to hear.
So you're saying like if you charge like for example a monthly fixed cost for a service, and instead of having the hourly where they pay as much as they use, they're paying a fixed cost and they need to make sure it's worth it to them in terms of usage. Yeah, I mean, again, I think that that's a good thing. I think that when you do that, you're telling your client, we're committing to being available for this kind of work. So we're putting that work aside, just like what a retainer is. And they are committing to, working with you enough, like, being committed enough to this work to make that valuable enough to them. I think even standard retainer models, I think with attorneys, like if you don't use it, you lose it. For hours, for example, you have 5 hours. If you don't use all the 5 hours, they're gone. I don't know if you necessarily get that money back, and you probably have more experience with that than I do, Dale.
We hate giving money back.
I think, right. I mean, I think that that's a sign if they're not using that sufficiently. I think that that's just a sign that they're maybe not the right fit for you in this model. Like maybe you should have a separate product for them. I think you should be steering this towards their needs, and you should be gauging that correctly when you create these products. And I think that goes back to this idea of investigation and discovery, which is not encouraged during hourly. Hourly, you're not really, there's no incentive to like understand the landscape, like kind of build together a plan, like, do some discovery, do some investigation. With fixed, you have to do that if you're going to attach prices to things. So I think that that's in the best interest of the client as well, because you are separating the strategy and discovery from the implementation. Those two rooms that I've referenced before from, Charles C. Baker, you're separating those two services and you're dedicating more time to that initial upfront work, which I would consider to be the value work, right? Like implementation is implementation. Like I'll put together a wireframe and a mock-up for you, and then you can go on Upwork and have someone build it for, $60, right? And it could be pretty good, or okay. And so strategy and the knowledge or terrible, right? Yes. Roll the dice on that one. So I think that's kind of that upfront investigation that's necessary for the fixed price model. That is the big hurdle for people, but also the big benefit for clients and for ourselves, because we're being compensated for strategy.
I think the fixed price model, to me, is something we ultimately need to get to as much as we can. And I've adopted it in a lot of ways, like SEO. It's a fixed price over a certain amount of time, fixed deliverables. Right. We've got a process. I think it makes you look more organized too, right? So if you're hourly, you just kind of show up, hey, I'm here, start paying me. All right, today we're going to do this. It's a lot different than showing someone a roadmap, showing them what you'll get when we're here, how long it's going to take. It's a much more And one thing, I don't know if you said this or not, fixed prices on things means your team repeats that process and they can feed back into the process and they can improve that process over and over and over. You get tighter and tighter and tighter and better at it. Whereas hourly, people are just kind of showing up and scrambling. Totally get that. And I think that right there is maybe a huge difference in the two.
Right. I think when you have fixed priced products, like you've said, for your clients' needs, that shows that you understand what their needs are. That shows that you are organized. And I think that if you're going to be a generalist, someone who doesn't necessarily understand the needs of their clients and who just puts like a sign up and is like, come on in and ask and just work with me and here's my hourly rate. I think that, you'll have to follow that model. But if you decide to be more of a specialist, hone in on your client base, you're going to be able to design fixed price products for them because you're going to understand their needs. And that's going to resonate with them because that you're going to be speaking their language. You're going to be serving them up exactly the things that they need. And you're going to be able to package it, put a bow on it, deliver a bit and repeat it. And then your team will be empowered to sell it because they'll be able to, in conversations with clients, they can refer to your product guide, which is a huge thing that I think, there are probably so many missed opportunities in regular client conversations because, people don't have a good understanding of the products that they're selling, even if they're in a service business, because that hasn't been productized because you're in the hourly model. So like you said, I think hourly has a place for trailblazing, understanding costs in terms of time, like when you're starting new things. But I think, like you said, the goal should be to move along the journey from hourly to fixed and to see that those hourly invoices you're sending out for $15, $20, $30 disappear. I don't want to send out any more $30 invoices. I just don't want to do it. So it looks like you're smirking over there. What do you got?
Full of money. I'll send out any kind of invoice.
I like that.
No, I agree with you 100%. But billing is one of my favorite things about owning a business. Right. At least getting paid. Getting paid on the invoices.
Right. Those are two different things. Sending it out and getting paid or that's
another episode.
Right.
All right, man. This is good stuff. Any closing words here? Any parting? I've said everything I have on the subject.
No, I think that's it. I think that the next level to this, I think there's the hourly, there's the fixed, which are two different invoicing methods, but then the further deeper level that we'll maybe get to in another episode is going to be the value, right? So how do you do value pricing? Because you can still do fixed pricing and focus on costs and your input plus profit. But eventually the next step on the journey is value. Instead of focusing on your costs and your inputs, you're focusing on the value of what you're delivering to your clients. But we won't get into that today. That's 24 minutes, Dale. I really appreciate your insight on the hourly versus fixed model. I hope that this was useful for people. And we'll see you guys during the next episode.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. Have a great weekend.
Adios.